Creating a color wheel using gradient.
When it comes to color wheels, there are two predominant ideas about what our primary colors are and how the color wheel should look. Back in Newton's day, he discovered that light could be broken into different wavelengths, and these wavelengths actually look like color. That's where we get the idea of red, blue, and yellow for our primary colors. But as technology has increased over the years, we've discovered
On the cyan, yellow, magenta color scheme
are actually better at producing bright secondary colors and beyond. In the past, I've always taught red, blue, and yellow as our primary colors. And while I still think they're very important, especially when trying to create more realistic images, a lot of times students will ask how to get bright colors. And I decided after watching a lot of videos and seeing other artists paint that the yellow, magenta, cyan will produce those brighter colors that some kids are looking for and that you might need in some situations. As you can see with the color wheel on the left side of the screen, I'm using red, blue, and yellow. And while these do give us beautiful tones, the blues and greens are much darker and therefore much more difficult to create bright pinks or really light purple blues or colors that aren't in that mainstream red, blue, yellow, orange, green, violet sphere. You can achieve muted colors using the cyan, yellow, magenta color scheme, and that's why I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards this way of thinking. As you can see here, I started the exact same way as I did on the left side with my primaries, yellow, magenta, and cyan inside, and I'm gradually blending the two together. Here you can see my green to lime green is much brighter and more pure of a color. I'm able to achieve brighter lime greens, more intense green pigments, deeper, more visible violets, all the way through the reds and oranges.
Now that we know a little bit about why we'll be using the colors that we are, let's get started creating a color wheel and gradient. A gradient is a gradual blend from one color to another. For our project, we're going to use a stencil design using positive and negative space. Positive space is the main focus of the picture, while the negative space is what's going on around and in between the main focus. To create the stencil, we will cut out the negative space. For my example, I'm using laminated white paper. This will help make sure that the paint doesn't bleed through the stencil, which you could also use acetate for. But for this video, I'll be using the white paper to help you see what I'm doing as I work. On the back of my stencil, I'm going to add a little bit of this Elmer's spray adhesive to help keep it from moving. Not much spray adhesive, just enough for it to be tacky. I'm going to be using a sponge to create this gradient, and I always like to start with a damp sponge. Remember, damp means wet. Wring as much of the excess water out of the sponge as possible, leaving it only moist. Roughly fill 1/3 of your skull with each color. Begin with the yellow on the top left corner of your skull. Fill in that full third with lots of pure pigment. Notice that I'm dabbing, not brushing. This is going to help make sure that what is underneath the stencil stays white. For the magenta and the cyan, I'll be doing the same technique as I did with the yellow. You'll notice this is a lot like what I did during the color wheel, where I just laid in a nice big section of each color before I started blending. I'm going to take a little red and yellow on my sponge, mixing them together to give me a deep red-orange. Keep in mind that yellow is a much weaker color than both magenta or cyan, so it'll take a lot more yellow to weaken the other two in order to create your oranges and greens. Magenta and cyan are pretty even as far as pigment goes, so the closer you'd like for it to be a red-violet, add more of your magenta. The more blue-violet you need it to be, add more blue. For clean, crisp pigments, make sure you wash your sponge frequently. Once you're sure all the paint's completely dry, slowly peel off your stencil, moving from side to side, taking care not to rip the paper underneath. This will give you a gradient that ranges the entire cyan, yellow, magenta color wheel with nice, crisp, pure, bright paper. and a decorative element that plays off of positive and negative space.